I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, as Russia imposes further restrictions on gas sales and mobile networks as Ukraine's campaign against Moscow's oil sector continues, we hear how workers are now being told to down tools as preemptive measures against Ukrainian drone attacks.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We are strong. We are Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 8th of October, 3 years and 228 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by our executive editor for audio, Francis Dearnley. Let's go into Russia first of all. And restrictions on gasoline sales in Russia have expanded to the Tyumen and the Sverdlovsk oblasts. This comes from Russian pro-government media outlets speaking yesterday. Now, those two regions are about 2,000 kilometers east of Moscow. They're way over. They border, or Sverdlovsk borders, Kazakhstan, and Tyumen is the next one north of there. They are the third and fourth regions to impose limits like this, following similar measures in occupied Crimea and Chelyabinsk Oblast. Now, that one also borders Tyumen and Sverdlovsk, so we're still quite a few thousand kilometers east of Moscow. The N1 gas station chain in Tyumen Oblast denied fuel shortages, but imposed a 30-litre cap per customer on the most widely used fuel for civilian cars. In neighbouring Sverdlovsk Oblast, pro-Russian government media outlet 66.ru reported similar measures, citing limits on purchases for stockpiling. Now, also in Sverdlovsk Oblast, telecoms firm Motiv said that it had been ordered to restrict mobile internet service due to the threat of drone attacks. The regional government there called the measures, quote, a preemptive response to the threat of an attack. The mobile internet service in the city has been jammed at night since late July, but these are additional measures. Now, linked to that, Sverdlovsk region's Department for Information Policy said in a statement a number of enterprises in the Sverdlovsk region have implemented a preemptive response to the threat of a drone attack, which includes the evacuation of their workers. That won't do their production figures any good at all. There are reports I've seen in the last hour on Russian telegram channels of a large fire, the Zavod Propiev plant in Novosibirsk in Russia. That's even further east. That's on the far side of Kazakhstan. It's actually closer to Beijing than Moscow. The plant there, we think, produces electronics and micro components for the military as well as civilian applications. Now, interestingly, Russian state media firm TASS seem to have started a regular daily update on their website reporting on Ukrainian strikes inside Russia. So I was having a look this morning, as you do.
Are they copying us?
Well, they might be, yeah. But today they've got a thing titled In Brief, What We Know About Overnight Ukrainian Drone Attacks on Russian Regions. Yesterday had something called Fact Box, What We Know About Ukrainian Overnight UAV Attack on Russian Regions. Uninhabited air vehicles, drones, you and me. And on Tuesday, they had another fact box saying what is known about consequences of overnight Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian regions. It's quite interesting, actually. Got some good stuff there. I mean, nothing says your lightning 3-week offensive is going well quite like having your main state media outlet keeping a tally of all the long-range attacks happening in your own country 3 years later. But I'm just being picky, I suppose. Now, we are sticking in Russia, but we're going to go via Ukraine, and you'll see why in a minute. Ukraine has captured an Indian national who was fighting alongside Russian forces. This comes from Ukraine's 63rd Mech Brigade in a statement yesterday. This individual, called Mohoti Sahel Mohammed Hussain, a 22-year-old student from the Indian city of Morbi, reportedly went to Russia to study at university, but was sentenced to 7 years in a Russian prison on drug-related charges. He was then offered the opportunity to sign a contract with the Russian military to avoid further punishment. So appearing on a video recorded by the brigade, Mohoti said, I didn't want to stay in prison, so I signed a contract for the special military operation, but I wanted to get out of there. Apparently 3 days into his first mission, he managed to surrender to Ukrainian troops. Quite something, given you can imagine what the kill zone is like with all the drones and what have you, but he managed to get to Ukrainian troops. He said, I came across a Ukrainian trench position about 2 or 3 kilometers away. I immediately put down my rifle and said I didn't want to fight. I needed help. I don't want to go back to Russia. There is no truth there, nothing. I'd rather go to prison here in Ukraine, he means. Now, he also claimed that although he'd been promised financial compensation for joining the Russian army, he'd never received it. And on that last point, I'd steer you towards a Twitter thread, actually, by Chris O, the open source intelligence commentator on Twitter, who's done something on Russian recruitment. He says recruitment to fight in Ukraine is drying up at the rate of a teaspoon a day, despite very generous salaries and bonuses. He's citing a mill blogger who has been speaking to a Russian government official. Now, this person that Chris O was referring to says thousands of Russian Telegram users have responded to inquiries to explain why they don't want to join the army. War blogger Alex Kartevik wrote a commentary after speaking to this low-level Russian official on why civilians there are increasingly wary of signing military contracts despite very lucrative salaries and bonuses. And they do seem to be, I think it's about a £76,000 sign-on bonus at the moment. Anyway, reasons given include distrust of the employer, both army and state, and distrust of the contract terms. Some people described the experience or the expectation of enslavement, in their words. They also cite the lack of fixed terms to the contract and the risk of forced extensions until the end of the special military operation, as well as problems with rotations and getting home on leave. Other reasons cited for people not signing up were complaints about poor training and equipment shortages. And there was also criticism of the so-called social elite, with the question being raised in many guises, why aren't the children of the elite going? And now there's more details in the Twitter thread. We'll put a link in the episode notes today. Now, Institute for the Study of War, the Washington, D.C.-based think tank, they are quoting this individual who has accurately reported on Russian military command changes in the past. ISW, quoting this individual, are saying that Kremlin has appointed former commander of Russian forces in Syria, Lieutenant General Sergei Kissel, as the deputy commander of the northern grouping of forces. That's the Russian forces operating in the northern Sumy and Kharkiv area of Ukraine. So this source said Kissel had organised the evacuation of Syria's military political leadership and senior military personnel after the fall of Bashar al-Assad and his regime, before being posted back to the Ukrainian theatre. Kissel commanded the 1st Guards Tank Army at the start of the full-scale invasion, but was reportedly suspended shortly after, so in spring 22, for his failure to seize Kharkiv city, and he was then sent to serve in Syria. Now, last year, Russian mill bloggers said that Kissel had been removed as commander of Russian forces in Syria for unspecified reasons. So maybe, if this is correct, and he is now actually back as deputy commander of the northern forces, maybe he's back in favour, which I think is probably unlikely, given the sort of Russian system of lead through punishment. But it could indicate the paucity of experienced or talented personnel in the Russian senior military leadership. We do not know. We'll keep an eye on that. Now then, occupational authorities in Crimea are said to be checking students' phones in schools for content and settings that may indicate a pro-Ukrainian position. This comes from Ukraine's Centre for Countering Disinformation, speaking yesterday. Activists of Ukrainian movements in the temporarily occupied territories report that in schools in Crimea, representatives of the occupation administration, together with Russian military personnel, are checking children's mobile phones, searching for banned apps, VPN services, and even Ukrainian language in the settings. Checking school children's phones is not a concern for security, they say, but a systematic attempt to intimidate children and impose loyalty to the Russian regime. The Centre for Countering Disinformation said such actions are part of the policy of Russification and the destruction of Ukrainian culture in temporarily occupied territories. Now into the rest of Ukraine, the unoccupied bit. 22 of 183 Russian drones got through Ukrainian air defense last night, resulting in 5 killed and 37 injured across the country. Ukraine's energy ministry said infrastructure in Chernihiv and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts were hit. Plus, I've seen other reporting of a thermal power plant owned by DTEK as Ukraine's largest private energy company, said to have suffered serious damage, with 2 workers injured, although DTEK didn't say where that had happened. It is clear, though, that Russia is aiming for the energy infrastructure as winter approaches, as well as targeting civilians, as they've been doing for years now. Now, most of yesterday's deaths and injuries were from strikes on residential areas in Kherson and Donetsk oblasts, but Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv in the north and Dnipropetrovsk in the centre of the country also suffered casualties. Next to no movement on the front lines, Kupiansk, I would point you to, in Kharkiv Oblast, still under extreme pressure, with Russian forces either in or just on the edge of the northern part of the city up there. That has been the case for a while now, but it is under extreme pressure. And that's us up to date. Francis, what have you got on the diplomatic front?
Thanks, yeah. Well, I don't know what gets you excited, Dom, and frankly, I don't want to know, but I'll tell you what's got me excited this morning. It's not Napoleon-related, it's Ambassador Jonathan Siviov. Now, who's that, I hear you cry at home? Well, he's one of Dom's dining buddies, I believe, at the Estonian embassy.
Yep.
And he's also General of the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, he has posted on X this morning the following. After 2 intense days in Brussels, I'm glad to say we're on track to raise the cost of aggression, support Ukraine, and strengthen our deterrence and defence. Good things are coming. #NATO, #Ukraine. Now, it could all be a damp squib, of course, but there are a lot of ongoing discussions in Brussels at the moment, and it feels like things are moving, albeit at a snail's pace, one we've come to expect from Brussels over the years. Could it be something to do with the story in the Financial Times today, namely that Belgium is under growing pressure to allow the use of frozen Russian assets for that reparations loan to Ukraine after Berlin and other Western capitals shifted their stance? As we talked about before, about 190 billion euros in Russian sovereign assets are held at Euroclear, the Brussels-based central securities depository, having been frozen in response to the invasion. But many Western nations, including the US, Germany and Belgium, were reluctant to access the funds for fear of legal and financial repercussions, something we've talked about so many times. But that is beginning to shift, particularly after the Trump administration called on G7 allies to seize or otherwise use Russia's underlying assets to fund Ukraine's defence, their words. Now, the Belgian Prime Minister has apparently asked the other 26 EU countries to cover the legal and financial risks associated with this loan and to guarantee the full amount to avoid Belgium having to pay it back. That stance has drawn condemnation from other capitals, particularly since Euroclear's profits have been subject to Belgian corporation tax. Now, one of the EU diplomats involved in these talks said Belgium has spent 3 years saying Euroclear is Belgian and so are the benefits. Now, when it wants to share the risks, it claims Euroclear is European. As the FT writes, the Commission has already sought to allay some of Belgium's concerns, but adding a provision for the loan to be covered by national contingent liabilities in the event Russia starts paying war reparations is ongoing. The Commission, backed by the majority of EU capitals, argues that the loan is structured in a way that does not amount to asset confiscation and points out that the court rulings outside the bloc are not registered by the EU. So tensions are high. Movement on this issue would be significant indeed. And it's not just European countries that are nervous at the moment about their liabilities and profit margins. In another interesting development, Reuters report how traders are asking Indian state refiners to pay for Russian oil in the Chinese currency amid warming ties between New Delhi and Beijing. The last time that happened was in 2023, but stopped after heightened tensions between India and China at the time. Prime Minister Modi of India has made his warm relations with Moscow abundantly clear, going much further than simply purchasing cheap energy and then keeping stum. Yesterday, he even took the time to wish Putin happy birthday, writing, "Spoke with my friend President Putin and conveyed warm birthday greetings and best wishes for his good health and long life. Deeply appreciate his personal commitment to deepening India-Russia ties over the years." Now, as we said before, one has to wonder whether such a thing would have been possible had the international freezing out of the Kremlin at the start of the war not thawed over the past year or so. And since we're speaking of birthdays, today's is Ursula von der Leyen's. So happy birthday, Ursula. Yep. Now, while we're on the subject of energy, just a quick update on the ongoing Nord Stream saga. Kyiv has said it will not interfere in the case of this Ukrainian citizen detained by Warsaw, Germany's request in connection with the pipeline's sabotage. Although, curiously, Poland's leader, Donald Tusk, has put out a tweet in the past 24 hours saying, the problem with Nord Stream 2 is not that it was blown up. The problem is that it was built. So another blow there, I think, for Angela Merkel after a tough week for her. Now, turning to Moscow, in news no one whatsoever saw coming, the Kremlin's deputy foreign minister has said that the powerful momentum from the Russia-US summit in Anchorage seems to have been spent, undermined through efforts by opponents and efforts by supporters of war till the last Ukrainian, mostly among the Europeans. Furthermore, Nikolai Patrushev, aide to the Russian president, added that the Russian armed forces can presently be regarded as the most powerful in the world, even surpassing the Americans. Now, after Dom got back from his Winnebago Odyssey in Alaska, we predicted that these would be the narratives Moscow would peddle after the fact. And so it's proved. Now, that narrative does land with some audiences, this idea that the Russian army is invincible and that the momentum has disappeared thanks to the West. But not all of their efforts do. And in a slightly amusing story reported in our paper today, and we'll link to it in the show notes, a state-backed Russian propaganda film attacking the West's moral decay made just the equivalent of £845 at the Russian box office and was pulled from cinemas after 3 weeks. It only cost them 200 million rubles to make. So a bargain. Now, do you want to hear the plot, Dom?
No, yes, I do.
It's called Tolerance.
Right.
Yep, Tolerance, ironically. And it's set in a fictional European country called Franglia. I think that's one of the fictional countries I made up when I was about 10, named after me. And in one scene, a child of a local pastor is castrated before being hanged from a crucifix on the front of her father's church. Apparently, the message of the film is that Europe's rejection of traditional spiritual values will lead to its destruction.
Right, so not comedy then.
Yeah, it's hardly When Harry Met Sally. Despite playing in more than 40 Russian cinemas, the nearly 3-hour film was watched by just 192 people on its opening weekend. I'd love to know who they were, averaging 3 audience members per screening.
So hang on, 40 cinemas.
Yeah.
It made 840 quid.
Yeah.
So 20 quid per cinema, basically.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, knowing what people get up to in cinemas, who says they were actually watching the film itself? Do you ever get up to any of that nonsense in your youth, Tom?
You started that.
Well, anyway, my lips are sealed. The film opens with the cautionary warning. This film represents the director's vision that omnipresent Anglo-Saxon liberalism will soon cause the ultimate degradation and extinction of once prosperous countries and peoples. So it really is a cheerful one. A row's broken out about the cost, with one production executive claiming it was all designed to extort millions from the culture ministry. And listen to this executive. I've literally no other explanation for how this crap could have received state support, he said, which I think, Dom, is similar to Moscow's review of our new film about our trip to Odessa. Now, we were joking a couple of days ago that we didn't want to cause another international incident on this podcast after you admitted to invading 2 sovereign nations by accident. But it seems we've triggered Moscow's deepest insecurities. On Russian state TV a couple of days ago, a pair of pundits pulled apart our chess segment in the documentary, showing us and redubbing me with a rather squeaky voiced gentleman playing Malcolm at chess. Now, the presenter at the beginning says to his colleague, I'd like to show a large piece of film from The Telegraph, which has made a big piece about how Ukraine is fighting against the remnants of all things Russian there, including the fight against Pushkin, of course. Here is an episode about chess, about how they plan to fight against Russian chess. He then goes on to give a short history of Russia's dominance at the sport and how it remains popular. It is quite likely that the new champion could sensationally be someone from this young generation in Russia. Naturally, Ukraine is not happy about this. They want to ban us, he says. And he takes particular umbrage later on, not at Dom and my chess skills, but at Telegraph's chess correspondent Malcolm Payne. Thanks to all of you who sent it to us, and to documentary maker Jack Leather, who, of course, joined us in Odessa. He's now chalked up yet another country which ran clips from one of his projects just in order to attack it, a true badge of honour. And so if you want to watch that film that everybody's talking about in Moscow's propaganda department, we'll link to it again in the show notes.
That's actually very interesting, because that totally makes Malcolm's point. Malcolm was saying how chess is such a part of Russian propaganda, culture wars, I suppose, that they've got to be the best, and they've been ejected currently from the International Chess Federation, which has absolutely inflamed them. Not that I didn't believe him when he said it, but this absolutely makes the point for him. It was a good piece. I do recommend people go and listen to it, right up to the point where I gave away my queen too easily. And anyway, we will put a link in the episode notes. That was a little while ago, but we put the video out recently, didn't we? So
we did, yeah. We'll have that in the show notes. And just as a point of record, who lost first, Dom, against Malcolm?
Well, I think we were both.
Yeah, it was Dom. Everyone.
Chess
was
the
Dom.
winner.
Okay.
Right, let's go to final thoughts. Shorter one today, folks. We do actually have a pre-record later. I was at the Prague Defence Summit a little while ago, organised by the International Institute for Strategic Studies in the Czech capital. I managed to grab a few minutes on the sidelines with Air Vice-Marshal Dianne Turton, who's Australia's military representative to NATO and the EU. So we had a quick chat about the world situation and the view from Australia. So that'll be coming up later on. But for final thoughts today, I'd like to take us back to this current discussion about the issue of possible US Tomahawk missiles going to Ukraine. There's, the very obvious question of, is it going to happen? Would the US do it? There's a question about how to fire them, as they are typically, not exclusively, but typically launched from the sea. Now, Mykola Beliskov, who's a research fellow at Ukraine's National Institute for Strategic Studies, that is a quasi-autonomous think tank in Ukraine. It provides analytical support for the office of the president, basically. But he has said that there are 15 recently retired US Navy, now I'm going to get this wrong, so Ticonderoga class missile cruisers. I don't know how to pronounce that class, but anyway, they were overtaken by the Aegis system. But anyway, these 15 ships, they have vertical launchers, and he suggests they might work as donors for some kind of land-based Tomahawk system. Now, I don't know that class of ship. I don't know how easy it would be to convert them to be able to fire in sort of land-based scenario. I don't know if that would work. How susceptible, how vulnerable would they be? If you have these ships and you just have them alongside somewhere on the Black Sea, I mean, surely that just says target. So do you try and dismantle them so you've got the thing on land? I don't know. But if you know more about it than I do, and pretty much everyone does, please do let me know if you think the Ticonderoga class ships from the US Navy might be some way of firing Tomahawks if the US do make that decision. Okay, Francis, where would you like to leave us?
Thanks, Dom, and thank you if you've written to me this week. You know who you are. I received a postcard, among other things, of a 19th century theatre, not unlike the one in Odessa, from Anna Maria from São Paulo, Brazil, and Christian of Rhode Island. Thank you both very much. Also one from Jeroen in New Zealand, showing a cat with Ukrainian-coloured fur nudging a Russian-coloured ball of wool off a table. He writes, "Since a Napoleon postmark is too rarely available for you, I went for a Churchill quote instead." And the stamp has a Spitfire postmark with Sir Winston's immortal words, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few," which in reverse is what they say about Dom's debt to the hotel bar in Chisinau. Hat tip also to Ken of T2 Ukraine, who sent us sunflower keyrings designed by Blackbird Jewellery London. The proceeds of that go to buying vehicles and taking humanitarian aid to Ukraine. He writes, "Please accept this shameless bribe as an inducement to give the jewellery a shout out on your podcast." Now, we're not usually in the habit of taking bribes, but just this once, happy to oblige Ken. As always, we try to reply to at least 3 questions you've sent in our newsletter each week and offer more reflections on the war and other subjects that we're reading about. Last week, for instance, I was reflecting on a life-changing book I read about psychology and attachment styles. This week, it'll all be about animals. And just on that score, a really odd one, folks, but I've got to give it a go, haven't I? I'm looking to volunteer with animals in central London during my spare time. Cat sitting, dog walking, alpaca riding, I'm not fussed. Anyone know of anywhere? Many of the big charities have super long waiting lists. Battersea is harder to get into than Oxbridge. I was actually given a tour of there once, and I can honestly say that the cats and dogs are so well looked after and the pens are so plush that I'd have actually moved in there if they'd let me roll out of bed. But they do amazing, amazing work. So anyway, if that sparks anything in any of you, you know somewhere a little bit niche that might be appropriate, do reach out. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to hearing from you as ever.
We do indeed, and we do read every message. I'm afraid we can't reply to all of them. I love the notes that say, "Dear whoever opens the mail for Ukraine the latest." It's me and him. It's me and him over there, and Adderley. So, that's why we can't get round to every one of them, because we're kind of busy. But we do read every single one, I assure you of that. Especially the ones directed to Don at Ukrainecast. I definitely read those. I love those ones. Anyway, folks, no, thank you. We do love chatting to you. I recently attended the Prague Defence Summit organised in the Czech capital by the International Institute for Strategic Studies. I managed to grab a few minutes on the sidelines with Air Vice-Marshal Dianne Turton, Australia's military representative to NATO and the EU. She had just spoken on the main stage and had described the current international situation by means of a Churchill quote, "The gathering storm is a very real one." I asked why she was so gloomy, whether there was a danger of smaller countries being ignored in these discussions, and how prepared Australian society is for the potential challenges to come. Here is our conversation. I'm joined now by Air Vice-Marshal Dianne Turton, Australia's military representative to NATO and the EU. Air Vice-Marshal, thanks so much for talking to Ukraine the latest. Now, we've just had a panel here at the Prague Defence Summit, and you quoted Churchill. You said the gathering storm is a very real one. That's a fairly bleak outlook for a lovely Friday morning in Prague, isn't it? Why so gloomy?
I guess it's not so much a bleak outlook, but it's more to sort of cue people to understanding that the geopolitical environment has changed since the end of World War II. The peace dividend that we have is perhaps now under threat, and in a way it's, I guess, a call to action to see what we can do so that we can preserve that peace so that we do not end in another world war.
Now, you also said there was a risk of ignoring regional countries. You said small or regional countries. Does Australia feel ignored and marginalised?
I guess it's more the shift away from multilateralism to what we're seeing a lot more multipolarism. And perhaps dismantling is a strong word, but we're seeing changes in some of the frameworks that allow smaller and middle nations to have a voice in the global rules-based order. So I think if we were to shift to a multipolar system, we would see countries such as Australia and some of the smaller countries not have that voice because of having to align with, I guess, stronger countries or stronger nations. And I think that's a real risk because we need to have the frameworks in place, we need to have the opportunities for even the smallest countries in the world to actually have a voice and have a say and have a vote in what the future rules-based order is going to look like.
Now, as you said, Australia's had a partner basis with NATO since 1953. I mean, do you feel that your voice is heard, that the regional concerns from your part of the neighbourhood are actually taken on board in NATO and the EU with your other hat on?
No, absolutely. And I think the Indo-Pacific 4 framework is a really good example where the Indo-Pacific 4 leaders have been invited to previous NATO summits. It is something that we engage very robustly. We have the 4 flagship projects that continue to progress, and they are underpinned by our cyber engagement with our defence industry, with our commitment to Ukraine, and also in the area of information security as well. So, and also I think the continual engagements both from our leadership and within the IP4, but also within NATO and in terms of presence within the Indo-Pacific. And also, as you would know, we have an E7 currently deployed in support of NATO and SATU in Europe at the moment, combined with the nations that participated in Talisman Sabre as well, demonstrate that I think it's a very robust relationship.
Now, you're talking about technical development. We've heard a lot about that during this summit in the last couple of days. We've heard a lot about how we need open systems and the flat and fast transfer of data, and it all looks wonderful. So an F-35 isn't a super stealth jet, it's just a node, another data point on the network. I mean, that's great in theory, but then it comes crashing up against defence contractors not wanting to release their IP to other firms. It comes up against Five Eyes security considerations. It comes up against all sorts of security considerations. I mean, how realistic is it that we just have this seamless transfer of data in the future?
I think that's where we want to be, but you're absolutely right in that it is quite complex. But I think where we're making progress is that we're understanding what those challenges are. We're understanding that we need information and sharing agreements. We're understanding that we need to partner closely with industry. We need to be able to speak on a classified basis, share classified information with industry. We need to be able to co-produce and co-develop, but more importantly, we need to share what our aspirations are, what our goals are. We need to share what our understanding of what the future battlefield is going to look like. We need to share processes, we need to share insights into how we think we're going to fight in the future, because if we don't do that, we're never going to achieve that understanding that is needed for that really meaningful relationship of co-development and co-production. And I think we're getting there.
I've had it described to me by another Australian official that your procurement processes are perfect for 1995 and somewhat less than ideal for 2025. So how far have you got to go, do you think? And have we more broadly to having a much more efficient way of procuring military equipment and military capability faster?
Yeah. I think we've come a long way, and one of the key realisations is that we won't have a long wait time for threats. So we are a lot better now at understanding what it is that we need to build capability for. Will we ever be at a point where we achieve perfection? I think absolutely no. And that's because we're now seeing a rapidly evolving battlefield, rapidly evolving technology that's been played out in conflict areas. So there are so many considerations which require, I think, fundamentally a deep cultural resilience and an ability to adapt to change, how we put the building blocks in place between our society, between industry, between our military, to actually enable us to change and pivot as change comes up very quickly. Because I think the difference between now and World War I and World War II is the speed of change. You know, we talk about evolution versus revolution. It's happening. It happened in World War I, it happened in World War II, but I think it's happening so much more quickly now, and so much so that I think it's challenging how well the human mind can respond that quickly. And I think we're at a point now where we need to harness AI, we need to harness technology to enhance our ability to do so.
Now, turning to Ukraine, if I may briefly, you said that apart from the battlefield lessons and the technology that we're seeing, you say we could learn about the culture of procuring capability quicker. Where does Ukraine have the advantage at the moment? What can they teach us about military procurement?
Ukraine has, unfortunately, an operational imperative, their national survival, which is driving a lot of change. But I think we can learn a lot from that, in that what they have been able to effectively demonstrate is that you have to be able to pivot and change and adapt to the battlefield environment, because you have an adversary that's doing the same as well. How do you enable asymmetric advantage? How do you build on what strengths you have? How do you build on your partnerships? How do you build on your relationships and your networks? And how do you build on your society? And I think they've done that really, really well, in terms of when you look to see who some of their key commanders are now in their military, have previously been in parts of industry that are now enabling them to support autonomous warfare. So they're being able to transition. I had an example of one of the Ukrainian commanders who had previously been in a company that looked at introducing pet monitoring cameras prior to the war, and that was his company. And now, he's working within the military and was able to transition some of that technology.
Pet monitoring, so to see what's digging up your garden.
Yeah, or even when you leave your dog at home.
I've got some problem with foxes at the moment in South London.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough of that.
Yeah, and so I think, they're being able to do that, being able to bring industry into the tent, but to be able to do it in effectively a peacetime environment, that's a real challenge, because a conflict mindset when you're at war is very, very different.
Does Australian society feel this as keenly? Do they see, as maybe we do here in Europe, and certainly further north and east you go in Europe, do they see the threat from Russia and what could mean for the Indo-Pacific region as keenly as we do you think?
I would like to think we do. I hope we do. There is a lot in our media. Australia is extremely privileged as a country in which our sovereign territory has never really been challenged. We have effectively a big moat. However, we do recognise, though, that that moat isn't going to be the protection that's going to keep us safe for years and years and years. So I'd like to think that the understanding is there amongst our people, within our industry, within our future generations. And we, as a government, our government actively works towards building that resilience, not just through education, but also through our exercises and our engagement in Europe, and also through our relationships with Japan and the Republic of Korea. So hopefully, when the time comes, we'll be ready to take on whatever challenge is there.
Now, you have got a big moat around you, but that hasn't stopped you deploying, and you personally are a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. Would Australia be willing to participate in the Coalition of the Willing or Reassurance Force, whatever it's going to be called?
So Australia has been a part of the planning and the discussions for Coalition of the Willing. We are looking to see where we can actually contribute, but at the end of the day, the government will make the final decision. We are currently an operational partner of NSATU. We, along with New Zealand, are the first non-allies that are participating in NSATU. For us, we see it as extremely important to be part of helping Ukraine preserve its sovereignty and assisting wherever we can.
AVM Dianne Turton, thank you so much for talking to Ukraine the latest.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.